But what we definitely don't do is buy the rights to, say, Tom Clancy and change Jack Ryan into Jackie Ryan and ask everyone else to love it. All right, let's do some demographics research. I promise by the end, this will all make sense. There's a good reason for this. So let's say we're making a military flight sim for the F-35. So the first thing we're going to do, and I'm not a professional by any means, but the first thing I would do as a game developer is I'm going to do a search. I'm going to find what are the biggest games in this genre. So, what are the biggest flight simulators? As far as video games go, you have Microsoft Flight Simulator. That's the one I'm going to stick with because I believe it is the biggest. And then you, for military flight sims, you're probably looking at DCS World, right? And then as far as arcade sims go, we have maybe an Ace Combat. When we look at these, we're going to find that Microsoft Flight Simulator over the last 4 years uh, came out in 2020. Microsoft Flight Simulator has about 15 million copies sold, and DCS has about 1.2 million Steam copies sold. It might have more through the website, likely does. And Ace Combat, our arcade sim, has about 2.5 million copies sold. Now, we might be tempted to add them together and use that as our total numbers for possible sales for our game, our upcoming game. And we would have 17, 18, 19 million potential sales we're looking at. That's our potential, our overall graph of people. However, that would be a mistake. We aren't going to have a potential user base of 20 million players because there's overlap between these communities. And the smart thing to do would be to take just the largest one. We have a potential audience of 15 million players. But even worse than that, we need to look at okay, Microsoft Flight Simulator is a general flight simulator that might appeal to a lot more people, and a military flight simulator is what we're making, and that might appeal to less people. You could also make the inverse argument that a military flight sim as a video game is going to appeal to a lot more people because it actually has combat in it and more of a fun factor. But I think that in flight sims, we don't get to make that argument because Microsoft Flight Simulator sells a lot more copies than anybody else. And we're not even going to look at Ace Combat because we're not making an arcade simulator. We're making a military F-35 flight simulator. Our potential audience is somewhere between the DCS numbers and the Microsoft Flight Simulator numbers. And potentially, unless we're thinking we're onto something and making a huge hit, our numbers are going to be smaller. Very likely, right? Our absolute maximum possible earnings depend on this number. However, that's another video. What we're interested in is targeting. So, what are the demographics of this audience? Like I said, it is not actually the Microsoft Flight Simulator audience, it's the military flight sim audience. So, DCS is the closest. And so, what are they? Well, we don't have DCS demographics exactly, but we do have this survey by a company called Navigraph in 2019 of overall flight simulation. And one thing we have is they did ask for gender, and it is 98.3% male, 0.7% female. Some prefer not to say, and other, right? So heavily skews toward male. I'm going to make a couple of assumptions, and we're going to say it's probably straight white males, and they have a little bit more of a conservative lean than your typical gamer. Are we going to make our game feature a non binary trans female? Definitely no, we're not going to do that. Unless that's the character that serves the story. But what we definitely don't do is buy the rights to, say, Tom Clancy and change Jack Ryan into Jackie Ryan and ask everyone else to love it. This is what's happening in entertainment right now. And I'm going to use their favorite thing, a pronoun to refer to them. Them is the activists that assert that people want to see themselves in the media they consume. Now, I disagree with that, but for the sake of their argument, let's go with what they're claiming. So, Circana does a survey every once in a while of US game players, and they report that 75% of US consumers play games. That's a huge number. Now, 71% of those are white, 10% Hispanic, 8% are black, 7% Asian Pacific Islander. This survey is only about 5,000 respondents. You see 71% Caucasian, 10%, 8%, 7%, and 3% various, right? Now, this is only about 5,000 respondents, and our flight sim, our Navigraph flight sim, was about 17,000 respondents. So we had a much higher participation rate here. So we might have a little bit better of survey, better accuracy with the Navigraph one. So given this data set, I'm going to infer some things based on this data. The Circana report very nearly matches our US demographics. So US demographics are white, about 60%, Hispanic, 19%, Black, 13.7%, and then we have all others, right? I don't think it's crazy to assume some things here. If the Circana survey had more respondents, I think we would get a more accurate picture. But we've known for a long time that video game enjoyers are mostly straight, white, and male. So if the survey roughly matches United States demos and a more specific, larger survey skews a little bit heavily more male, then we can assume that our Circana survey is pretty close and maybe would skew a little more heavily male if they had more respondents. So 7.1% of the United States identifies as LGBT plus. We can assume that remains roughly equivalent in the gaming population, similar to the way we're going to infer that the LGBT population in gaming also roughly matches the US population. So if people want to see themselves in their media, then wouldn't you want to serve the largest portion of the audience? Of course you would. Does that mean we should never make games featuring a black, gay, or trans protagonist? Of course it doesn't. Sometimes the story is served with these characters. However, if I agree with their assertion, you should expect to not sell that many copies. It's demographics and representation 101. Except I don't agree. I don't think most people care. And what I do think is most people don't want to be lectured to. If we take a look at some games here with female protagonists, we have Horizon Zero Dawn, Horizon Forbidden West, Bayonetta, Hellblade, the first one, Half-Life Alyx, Control, Celeste, Assassin's Creed Syndicate. Let's not use that one. Metroid, Tomb Raider. It's not. Here it is. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, Mirror's Edge. I don't think Nier Automata. I don't think these games sell as much as they do without having some men also buy these games. The Witcher, I don't think that I remember hearing anybody complain about any kind of bisexual narratives that were in The Witcher or in Dragon Age or in Mass Effect or in any other game that has allowed these things to happen. Also, The Witcher's main protagonist is Geralt, a white male. Straight is a different question, but I don't think this game sells as good as it did if women don't play this game. What I think people want is good games, first and foremost, good stories, second, and it doesn't matter what the characters are, what they identify as long as what you're doing serves the story and the gameplay. Outside of that, we can tell when you're lecturing, we can tell when you're pushing an agenda, and we don't want it. We're done with it.